Halloween is considered the spookiest day of the year. People all around the world celebrate this haunting holiday, whether it's by dressing as a blood-curdling boogeyman or playing frightful pranks on your friends and neighbours. Horror is in full bloom come this day every year. But what happens when someone's worst nightmare becomes a reality? Tonight on the Front Room podcast, we're going to be discussing this chilling subject. We're going to tell you about murders on Halloween.
So the first case we're going to look at is the murder of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman. You familiar with this story?
Only vaguely. I don't know much detail.
Well, it was October 31st, 1981, or Halloween as some people call it. 20-year-old university student Elizabeth Platzman and 39-year-old photographer Ronald Sisman were found murdered in Sisman's New York City apartment. What happened? Ronald Sisman had invited Elizabeth Platzman over to his apartment on short notice for an impromptu photo shoot. Sisman ran 2 photography businesses out of his apartment and was said to be quite successful. The two had met only weeks earlier, but despite their 19-year age difference, they appeared to be hitting it off, apparently. I have to say, 39-year-old and 20-year-old, I was reading it and at first it did sort of make me think that's a bit odd. But you were sort of saying...
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on the maturity of them both, I suppose, emotionally.
Yeah, and I know people, it's easy to say it was a different time back then, but it does seem like maybe it was more common.
Yeah, definitely.
At some point during the photo shoot, the apartment door banged frantically. One of the pair opened the door where they were confronted by a group of people. Online research doesn't reveal how many, however it is known that there was no forced entry, so they must have let these people in voluntarily. They didn't have to break into the apartment. These people weren't trick-or-treaters, but a violent gang who bludgeoned the duo mercilessly before shooting each of them in the back of the head once. I know I just said there weren't trick-or-treaters, but given what day of the year it was, how likely do you reckon it is that at least one of them said trick-or-treat?
Yeah, probably extremely likely.
Thought he was very class in it as well while he was doing this. So the gang ransacked, wrecked the flat, took all forms of ID from their victims, and also took a pistol which was registered and belonged to Ron. The pistol is believed to have been the murder weapon. So Ronald and Elizabeth were most likely murdered by a pistol that actually belonged to Ronald. Reports I've read online say that the attackers were wearing Halloween masks, right? But considering that the only witnesses to this crime were killed during it, there's absolutely no way of verifying that. See, every source you look up this, it mentions Halloween mask-wearing murderers broke in and killed them.
Yeah, I wonder where that came from then.
That must be an urban legend.
Yeah.
I couldn't find anything that verified that.
Though a lot of people would be dressed up on Halloween anyway.
Mate, the only way that could be true is if there's an eyewitness to this. People in the apartment did admit to hearing screams.
Yeah, but no actual visual sightings.
No visual sightings. The day before this was the release date for Halloween 2, so if they were wearing Halloween masks, most likely, I reckon, at least one of them was wearing a Mike Myers mask.
Probably.
So what happened? Well, in the immediate aftermath, there was a complete lack of major publicity. The story only made page 14 of the New York Times on Monday morning. Do you think it would be receiving a lot more attention, a big Halloween Day murder in New York?
Yeah, especially because it's a group of people. Surely it is a matter of public safety.
I know.
For people to lock their doors and stuff.
And as well, it doesn't seem as if there was too much going on in NYC at the time, because the front page story was that the headline story was about military outlays in New York and a delay for tax raises proposal for 2 to 3 years by Ronald Reagan. So I don't know why this wasn't more prominent than those stories.
I know, that doesn't make any sense to me.
I know there was other ongoing investigations in New York that different murders at the time, so maybe they didn't want to keep going along the same thing.
I don't know. They seem to report on nearly everything anyway, so why wouldn't they?
Yeah. A prevailing theory about the case, and one that the NYPD suspected from the start, was regarding Ronald Sisman's supposed involvement in drug dealing. Sisman had been accused in the past of being a drug dealer, dealing both cocaine and weed. During a photo shoot the year before, Sisman was said to have become belligerently angry after his sexual and drug-consuming proposals were rejected when he was photographing actress Melanie Haller in his apartment. Where do you know the name Melanie Haller from, you're asking? Yeah. Well, Melanie Haller starred in such classics as 1973's Hollywood 90028, a movie, ironically, about an aspiring Hollywood photographer taking out his frustrations on young female clients by strangling them to death.
Life imitates art.
Life imitates art. I bet you Melanie's alarm bells were ringing like mad whenever this guy was cracking up after she'd been in that movie.
Yeah, definitely.
She also starred in 7 episodes of 1970s sitcom Welcome Back, Kotter, where a compassionate teacher returns to his inner city high school from youth to teach a new generation of troublemaking kids. Melanie played buxom blonde Angie Grabowski, a new girl in class who declares she's going to become a sweat hog, but the other sweat hogs strongly oppose her joining the group, so she decides to pull a stunt to prove her worth, which backfires and nearly gets them all expelled. So a fairly prominent person Sisman was photographing, which shows he was a successful photographer. It's one thing if this was just a random Halloween killing, however, is there something more sinister to this involving an infamous murderer? David Berkowitz was born as Richard David Falco, the son of Sam Killer he's been nicknamed as. He was born on the 1st of June 1953. In August 1977, at age just 24, he was arrested and later convicted of the brutal murder of 6 people, receiving 6 separate life sentences for each murder. Receiving 1 separate life sentence for all 6 murders. He said they have targeted mainly young female victims, especially if they had long, wavy, dark hair. He exhibited an enduring enjoyment of his activities, often returning to the scene of his crimes, and infamously committed some of his attacks while the women were with their boyfriends in parked cars. He claims to have committed his first attack on Christmas Eve 1975, where one of his victims was a 15-year-old schoolgirl. He once approached 2 other victims while wearing military gear, asking for directions, stating, "Can you tell me how to get to," before quickly pointing his trademark revolver at them. Another nickname he has is the .44 caliber killer. Berkowitz once shot a victim in the neck, leaving them paraplegic, shot a 19-year-old college student as she held up her textbooks to shield her, wrote a taunting letter to the police about their fruitless efforts to capture him, and basically this David Berkowitz is a real jerk.
I do actually recognise that story. The one about the car and the girls being with their boyfriends. There's definitely been like movies and stuff about that, hasn't there?
Yeah, probably one of those TV movies. Because
Yeah.
I feel like I've read, before I researched this for this episode, I feel like I'd read this Wikipedia page before, but I wasn't familiar with many of the details. Anyway, regarding his link to the murders of Sisman and Platzman, an inmate in New York City's infamous Riker Island prison told a guard that David Berkowitz had predicted their slaying in advance. But how could a lone killer who had been imprisoned long before the incident took place possibly know about this? Well, one theory is that Berkowitz had not acted alone in his murders, and he was actually part of a larger gang. Some speculation even claims that this gang is a satanic cult, but see, whenever I was looking into it, that aspect of it, I feel, removes a seriousness or realness to the crimes, and it sort of shifts attention to like a religious occult nature, which I think is sort of distracting and almost excuse-making for people committing horrible crimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation.
Maybe he was part of a satanic cult, but research that bit for yourselves, because I think that just detracts from the story and makes people think of it as sort of, it almost becomes a work of fiction when you're talking about this demonic satanic group doing all these horrible things. In reality, it's real people acting together. It's claimed that Sisman was a personal photographer or cameraman for this group, and that he'd even filmed a ritual, which again in reality was most likely just a gang rape that the gang had performed on Melanie Haller in 1980. So he was a photographer for this actress, and supposedly, unbeknownst to her, had previously filmed a time where she was date raped. So the inmate in Riker Island told detectives that Berkowitz informed him that Sisman owned snuff footage of one of the gang shootings, which he was going to hand over to the police to avoid impending drug charges he was facing. It should be added, though, that David Berkowitz has claimed many things over the years while in prison, and much of them have proven to be completely fabricated. So while what he's saying does sound like an interesting, plausible theory, he has made up and confessed to numerous crimes where it's later been completely proven that he was unrelated.
So he's an attention seeker?
He's like all of them, he's a major attention seeker. When he was interviewed, though, by detectives regarding the report from the inmate that he had knowledge of the murder in advance, he was able to give an eerily accurate description of Sisman's apartment. Again, to me, that doesn't mean necessarily that he did know about these murders. It just means that he seems to know Sisman, and that he may have even been in his apartment previously.
Yeah, and did he describe how Sisman looked, or just his apartment?
He was able to prove that he did know Sisman, and he was able to give an accurate description of the apartment, but it isn't known for sure that he had knowledge in advance that this gang were going to murder him. Because he'd been in prison for several years by the time of the murder.
Yeah, but he definitely could have, if it was a gang of people, then maybe someone could have told him from the outside.
Even inside, because it is rumoured that members of this gang involved law enforcement, so it could have been.
That's an interesting theory, definitely, because if he had drug deal charges against him or something, then the police would know that as well, and then know who he is in relation to the cult.
Exactly.
If it's called that.
You'll be glad to know that these days David Berkowitz is a reformed man. He became a born-again Christian while in prison, and now refers to himself under the name Son of Hope instead of Son of Sam.
I don't buy that for a second.
He's also called Son of Sam because he wrote this bizarre taunting letter where he referred to himself as the Son of Sam and blamed society for before he'd been caught and convicted of these murders. He would like blame society and blamed his upbringing and the world shunning him and mistreating him for all the crimes he was committing. So that's why he called himself. That's why he's known as Son of Sam. He mentioned it in a taunting letter.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't believe that he's reformed.
Oh well, maybe you should check out his prison blog that he's been updating regularly since 2016, ariseandshine.org. So he runs a blog from prison. He tells people who are worried about the coronavirus to call a prayer hotline for guidance. He last updated this blog as recently as the 11th of October. The entry was entitled A Perfect Day. It started with the sentence, "This afternoon, I was able to go outdoors for our usual 3-hour recreation period. It was cool but sunny." Looks like David's having a good time in prison now.
It's quite odd, isn't it?
I couldn't believe, when you go on this, he's been updating this blog constantly, like regularly, for the last number of years. And you would just think he was this happy-go-lucky wee fella.
And for someone who's in prison for like serious crimes,
I know.
you don't think he would be allowed such
I never
internet
thought,
access?
surely, is there a guard sitting beside you in prison when you're on like your computer time?
I don't know.
I don't know how it works.
I
He's
know,
in
'cause
prison.
surely then they would be able to go and watch porn and stuff. Well, they wouldn't have their own individual laptops in their cells, so I
Yeah.
don't know actually.
Do you know, I know it's a completely different country, but in Norway, did you ever hear that guy Vargs? And he was he killed, what's he called? Euronymous.
Yes.
He murdered him.
Yes.
Whenever he was he got something like 21 years for that murder. He ran a website and he made YouTube videos and all from prison. He was allowed to do it. I know the
Yeah.
Scandinavian system's different.
Did he not get out at the weekends or
He would
something
get
as
out on
well?
weekends, but that's the way their system works. They gradually reintegrate you into society.
That's not a bad system, I
I know.
suppose, but depend on the crime.
Well, old David won't be getting integrated back into society because he has 6 life sentences without the chance for parole. In a way, though, should you then be allowed to just do what you want? Because you're going to be in prison anyway, so what harm is there in him running a website? A blog?
Yeah, and then he has no chance of parole, did you say?
No chance. 6 life sentences, he'll never get a day in prison, guaranteed.
Well, then I don't know. Maybe I'll change my opinion on whether he's reformed or not. Because what's the point if you're not going to get out of prison? What's the point in pretending that you're
Well,
a
you
born
can-
again Christian?
Yeah, you can appeal for your sentence to be lessened.
Oh right, okay. Well,
But-
then that would make sense. And would you get more privileges if you get on good? Or not?
Maybe. I know it seems like he has a lot of privileges at the minute if he's run this
Yeah,
fucking
that
blog.
definitely sounds
He even
like it.
gossips in the blog. He says about how he noticed like a blossoming relationship between one of the female guards and another of the staff workers.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's ariseandshine.org if you want to keep up to date with what David's doing now. So for conclusions, I think that despite lying multiple times over the years, I actually do believe Berkowitz's jailhouse confession on this one. Though I lean heavily against the idea that he worked as part of a satanic cult. I believe he was part of a group of people who went around committing horrible crimes and maybe even filmed it. That film ended up coming to bite them because Sisman was going to use that and incriminate them to get out of his own drug charges. I don't believe the satanic element. I do believe that he didn't work alone.
Also, I was just thinking that because you said that it wasn't on the front page
Yeah.
of the newspaper, maybe that's something because one of the members is to do with the media or the police.
It could be, actually.
Could
Yeah.
be.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting and quite sad, though, that ultimately, 39 years on from it, the police seem to be no closer to finding out what happened than they were that day. The only link is from a man in prison for 6 life sentences who has openly lied about being involved in numerous other crimes.
And the fact that it hasn't been given any more attention after all these years and no more progress has been made just makes me sort of believe maybe there's a wee bit of corruption in the police as well. I'm really going for this angle now.
Yeah.
but It's just because you see so much corruption in police these days.
Not to end on a pessimistic negative note for our first case, but I think this is one that will never actually be solved.
No, I don't think so either.
So that's my Halloween story. What one have you got?
Today I'm going to tell you about the Toolbox Killers.
Okay.
Okay.
Familiar with the name?
Roy Norris and Lawrence Bittaker, or more infamously known as the Toolbox Killers, are responsible for the horrific crimes of kidnap, torture, rape, and ultimately murdering 5 teenage girls within 5 months, ending their spree on Halloween night 1979. Bittaker and Norris were former prison friends who reunited after their release. They originally met in California State Prison. Norris was a mentally disordered sex offender who had previously been in a mental institution for violently trying to sexually assault females. After 4 years, the staff claimed he was cured. However, within weeks of his release, he ended up in prison for partially strangling and raping a woman. Bittaker, however, was an intelligent man. He had an IQ in the top 1% of the population and also a photographic memory. But he had self-destructive behaviours and psychopathic tendencies, believed to originate from his upbringing. Both Bittaker and Norris are believed to have suffered physical and sexual abuse as children, both being in the foster care system at one stage or another, as well as living in unstable homes when they weren't in the system. This in itself caused them to both grow up feeling alienated from their peers. It's easy to speculate that this potentially made their bond stronger and made both their behaviours and deranged thoughts feel validated. Bittaker was never convicted for sex crimes before he met Norris. Instead, he was charged with motor theft, first in Louisiana. He was then sent to a reformatory, where it is said he behaved so strangely that he was transferred to a medical centre in Missouri. The staff at the medical centre found him hostile and manipulative. It's clear that this is true because he altered his behaviour so much that within 1 year the staff believed they had cured him and was then released.
That's mad. He was able to convince even them.
Mad that both medical centres thought that both men were cured as well.
Yeah.
Bittaker continued his destructive behaviours once released. He started stealing cars, burgling, and then he stabbed a shop assistant that was trying to prevent him from shoplifting. After Bittaker and Norris served their time for their previous crimes, Bittaker then wrote to Norris asking to meet up at a hotel. While in prison, they had disclosed to each other their perverse sexual fantasies. Now at the hotel, they discussed how they would be able to carry them out in real life. Bittaker bought a silver cargo van that had no side windows, which is obviously perfect for what they wanted to do, and they nicknamed it Murder Mac. For the next 5 months, from June the 24th to October 31st, they cruised the Pacific Coast Highway looking for teenage girls that they wanted to rape and murder. They were ruthless in their hunting and preparation. They did practice runs with over 20 girls, figuring out which was the best way to lure them into their van and the best place to bring them to carry out their depraved fantasies. The pair discovered a secluded fire road. I don't really know what fire road means.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
It must mean somewhere, I don't know, like
off the grid?
Maybe something to do with like if there's a fire and then the fire trucks have to
Oh,
go up
right,
it.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm actually not sure. Well, anyway, the pair discovered a secluded fire road located in the San Gabriel Mountains that they deemed perfect for them. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail of the horrific crimes that they did on each individual victim because it was incredibly hard emotionally doing the research.
Really?
Yeah, and I do need to give a disclaimer for what brief things I'm about to mention because it obviously involves violent sexual abuse, torture, and deeply tragic deaths. So if this isn't something that you think you can listen to, please click off.
Very classy move there.
Lucinda Lynn Schaefer was the first victim of the Toolbox Killers. The pair tried to entice her into the van with promise of weed, but she refused. They then drove ahead of her and parked up so when she walked past, they could grab her into the van. They succeeded and drove her up to the fire road, where they took turns raping her.
Jeez.
They eventually decided that they were going to murder her, and Norris attempted to manually strangle her. However, he became so disturbed by the look in her eyes and had to run away to vomit.
Was manually strangled by hand?
Yeah. Bittaker then took over, and when she collapsed and began convulsing, he started using a wire coat hanger and twisted it around her neck using pliers until she stopped moving. They disposed of her body by throwing her off a canyon and hoping animals would get to her. Over the next 4 months, Bittaker and Norris brutally and ruthlessly murdered 3 more teenage girls: 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall, 15-year-old Jackie Doris Gilliam, and the youngest of their victims, 13-year-old Jacqueline Leah Lamp. They were all sadly murdered in the same fashion as the first victim. Their last victim was 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford. On Halloween night, she was hitchhiking home from a Halloween party in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Unfortunately for Ledford, this was a night that the Toolbox murderers changed their usual routine of searching coastal routes and beaches. They noticed her waiting at a gas station and offered her a ride home. It's thought that she accepted this lift because she already knew Bittaker. He frequently ate at a restaurant where Ledford was a part-time waitress. They drove around aimlessly for a while, but the pair didn't take long, drawing a knife out and bounding Ledford while they started their vicious attacks on her. And I really don't want to go into much more detail here because the things these men did are beyond comprehension and just pure evil. They also recorded on a tape recorder the torture that Ledford ensued, which is to this day apparently one of the most disturbing things you could listen to, and which we'll get to at the end.
Why did they record it? For their own use?
Yeah, for their own use. And whenever I was researching this as well, it actually came up on YouTube, and I was about to listen to it before I'd read even more.
Really?
And I'm so happy I didn't listen to it. So after 2 hours of pure torture, Ledford was strangled in the same fashion using a wire coat hanger. But instead of disposing her body into a canyon, they decided to discard her body on somebody's front lawn. so that they could see the reaction of the news and media. This probably just shows to me that they were probably just trying to get more attention, and they were amping up their crimes.
Not to be weird. Would it not be more difficult to strangle somebody with a wire coat hanger than but just with your hands?
Well, they're using a coat hanger and pliers, and then just twisting it, so that it's just getting tighter and tighter around your neck, and they only have to twist the pliers. Do you know what I mean?
That definitely makes you think they're taking enjoyment in it, because surely it would actually be easier just to use your hands.
Yeah. They're definitely taking enjoyment out of it. The next month, Norris became reacquainted with another old prison mate, and for some reason he confided in him of his crimes. Now, I'm only speculating on this, but I think it was probably to boast or impress him or try to shock him or something.
Probably, yeah, that
like,
makes sense.
What else?
Yeah.
Why else would he just randomly tell him? And like, not even a friend, just an acquaintance.
See, in a way, it's hard if you were doing this sort of thing. Kind of would be busting the tail of people, wouldn't you?
Yeah, because I'm sure they had like some like massive egos doing this as well. This ultimately led to Norris and Bittaker's downfall, as his prison acquaintance told his attorney, who went to the authorities, who then started an investigation and eventually arrested both men. Bittaker was sentenced to death, and Norris was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole for complying with the police, which is still, I know obviously people get more lenient sentences whenever they comply with the police, but to have the possibility of parole after horrific crimes to children is just unbelievable. Bittaker never expressed any remorse for his crimes, stating that the only remorse he felt was that he got caught and ruined his own life in doing so. He died while on death row on December 13th, 2019, age 79, due to natural causes. Norris also died of natural causes while still incarcerated. He had repeatedly claimed, however, that the only reason he participated in the murders was out of fear of Bittaker, which I find really hard to believe considering his past violence against women and the fact that they named their van Murder Mac. Like, murder. Norris is also quoted saying, when asked about the tape recording of Ledford, "We have all heard women scream in horror films. Still, we know that no one is really screaming. Why? Simply because an actress can produce some sounds that convince us that something vile and heinous is happening. If you ever heard that tape, there is just no possible way that you'd not be crying and trembling. I doubt you could listen to more than a full 60 seconds of it." This is now known to be true because during the trial, when this was played for the jury, numbers of them had to run out of the courtroom crying, and several were even vomiting.
That's crazy.
Isn't it? And this recording is now used to this day to train and desensitize FBI agents to the raw reality of torture and murder.
Fuck me, that's good. I don't want to listen to it because some things do stick with you.
Yeah, there's no way I would listen to it after hearing that.
I still remember listening to an interview with a pedo where he unexpectedly started going into detail, and it's always stuck with me.
Oh yeah, you told me about that and said I shouldn't ever listen to it. Obviously that's such a heavy topic to listen to. It's really clear to me though that they both had a lot of severe mental health issues. The fact that they were both in mental institutions for some sort of time, but the fact that they were cured apparently as well.
It's amazing they're able to convince people of that.
Yeah.
Even though they are mentally ill.
Yeah, but Bittaker obviously was really, really intelligent, so he would have been able to convince him. But Norris, just for all his like sexual crimes, how would he ever be cured?
It's interesting. Even people with severe mental illness don't seem to lose their ability to manipulate people.
Yeah, I know. That is really interesting. To even want to harm another human in that sort of way in the first place, like, but to get joy and pleasure out of it is scary to imagine as well. And
yeah, clearly they're doing it for joy. Recording it. I mean, what year was this again?
1979.
So I don't know. Would that many people have had like personal recorders and stuff back then?
They were probably only starting to get that sort of thing. Also, Bittaker was a really rich man.
Yeah.
So
really?
Because he was so smart, he must have somehow got a really good job.
Yeah. I always think, I know maybe we're not in the mind of a murderer, but it's so incriminating to record or video or anything yourself doing these things.
Yeah.
Like even in the previous case we're talking about there's supposed snuff videos. Why would you even record them? It is, I know people get sick pleasure of watching back on them, but you couldn't have anything more incriminating.
It definitely has to be something to do with your ego, because you must think there's no way I'm going to get caught doing this because I'm so good at, like, well, for these ones especially, the way they just got rid of the bodies.
Exactly.
Even though, and then their egos must have got worse as it went on because they started, well, they put her body out.
Yeah, they're getting more successful and they're convinced they're untouchable as it goes on.
Though, they definitely would have went on to kill way more like guards if they could have. Like if he hadn't have went and told that prison mate, then God knows how long that would have went on for.
Funny though, even in prison, sort of like school, he still feels the need to like brag to his mates.
I know, but I think that that has to do probably with being alienated whenever he was younger.
Probably.
And not having like any friends and stuff. And to me, it is really sad to think that they were both innocent boys at one stage. And I wonder, like, if it was always going to happen to them, like if it was in their genes or if it was because of their upbringing.
Yeah.
That's probably like middle ground in between them two. But I think though that Norris should be sentenced to death as well. I don't even know how I feel about the death penalty, but I just feel like for these crimes, like the more, like I didn't really go into much detail there at all, but the things that I read were just so horrific that he definitely should have been sentenced to death.
I always struggle to believe, I have to admit, serial crimes where two people commit them together.
Yeah.
And usually you'll find one of them is like, I was being manipulated by the other person, I was afraid of the other person. Like even the Columbine shooters, one of them is said to have been the ringleader and the other one was afraid of him and following his lead. I always think though, maybe there is a certain element of truth to that in a lot of these. But I personally, whenever I read that, I always do a mental eye roll and think you were involved as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like apparently like a lot of people would always assume that Bittaker was the one who was in charge, but he had no history of sexual crime. But then whenever he became friends with Norris, then he maybe got him into that sort of way of thinking as well.
Yeah.
Even though he was already a criminal and violent, but not sexually towards women. But then they both came together, and both of their minds together must have just been horrible and just amped each other up.
I suppose if he's able to manipulate fully qualified mental health experts, he'll be able to manipulate somebody with mental health problems as well.
Yeah, but I still think Norris was, if he wasn't like a stupid, like he didn't have a low IQ, I don't think so.
No.
He's definitely fully capable of being in control of his own emotions and thoughts and stuff like that. It's easy to become detached from the reality of these cases when you're researching them, but it's truly sad to think that when these young girls left their homes, they would never see their families again.
Thanks very much then for listening to the first episode of the Front Room podcast. We've got a lot of interesting topics lined up for the coming weeks, so if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to keep listening.